Welcome back to Logic Basics. We are in the unit on rules of inference. We have just learned about several different argument forms that are valid. They were listed on this handout. And now we want to learn how to apply these deductions. So it says complete the deductions. And I want to show you how to use this. I have placed this handout on my iPad and I want to, let's see what happens if I draw on it. Okay, so I want to show you what's going on. It looks small. Let's see if I could grow it. It's stuck that size. Okay, we'll work with what we've got. But I can write on it. Okay. So we're going to learn how to read this handout, and notice we're going to figure out which of the argument forms is being used in each of these examples. Now, instead of P and Q, we're using different letters. You can always substitute P and Q for those letters. Let me show you what I mean. So next to this number 1, we have A or B. Okay, what if I were to say, instead of A or B, I said P or Q, and then that's a premise. And it also tells us, we have another premise here, not B. So remember, I replaced B with Q, so this is not Q. Therefore, my conclusion is line 3. Therefore, P. Now, I've just replaced the letters from the argument forms that we already know about from up here. So what does this look like to you? Which argument form uses OR as its connector and has a negation in the minor premise? That's disjunctive syllogism. So we're going to put that on the line, DS. That's a disjunctive syllogism. Okay, again, I want to point out how to read this. We have, it tells us premise, premise, and then there's a number beside each of these. I'm going to suggest that you ignore this, okay? Those sort of become unhelpful after a little while. But look at number 2, okay? It's telling us if B, then C plus P. Remember, those are a unit. They're in a bracket. And then that's a premise. So that's our major premise. And then 2 will be our minor premise. It says B. And then we have this little 1, 2. That's telling us from line 1 and line 2, you get 3 as a conclusion. So I'm going to go C plus P as my conclusion. Now we have to figure out what argument form is being used here. Remember, you can substitute, use P and Q instead. So let B stand for P. So now let's change it. So we have B is now P. C and P is a unit. So let that be Q as a unit. And then we have B as our minor premise, and then Q is our conclusion. So when we do that, we can see it saying, if P, then Q. P, therefore, Q. What does that look like? Take a look at the connectors. There's no negation sign. We have an if then. That one is, let me get my pencil out here. That one is modus ponens, right? The mode of positing. So I would like you to do each of these. Try to figure it out. I'm going to show you a harder one though. Let me see if I can advance this a little to the I think I might need to pause this to advance the handout to get you to some of the harder ones. So I'll be right back. Okay, here we are with some of the harder problems from the second page. Let's do number 10. Look at number 10. 10 says, I'm just going to draw as I read it for you. So line 1 says D or S, and that's within a bracket, so it's a unit. D or S, then P and Q. Okay, D or S, then P and Q. That's the first premise. The second premise says D or S, and then the conclusion, line 3, says P and Q. Now this is a little deceiving, right? It has a lot of different connectors in it, and we didn't learn anything that looked like that. So remember I told you the brackets are in their units. So why don't we change this and let this first one in brackets be P, okay? If P, then let's let this be Q. So it looks more like the original ones we learned. All right, so then this would be P here, because it's D or S, which is here. D or S is P. And then P and Q is here. So then that would be Q. All right, P, then Q. P, therefore Q. What's that? That's our friend, modus ponens, right? So it may look complicated, but when you replace the original P's and Q's and you look at the connectors, the primary connectors, and you look at what's a unit in brackets, you can decipher what is being said here in this argument. So let's try another. Let's try a hard one. Let's look at, let's see, what has the 5 lines? Maybe 16. Let's look at 16. I will get out of the way here. 16 says, line 1, if T, then Q. Line 2 says, if S, then Y. Line 3 says T or S. Line 4 says if T, then Q, and that's a unit, and if S, then Y, that's a unit. And then 5 says Q or Y. All right, and now we have a line next to 5, and we have a line next to 4. So it's telling us we have some conclusions here. And then let's see. I think I'm doing 16 here. I'm just going to circle so I see what I'm looking at. All right, so next to line 4, it tells us from line 1 and 2 we're getting this conclusion. And next to line 5, it's telling us from 4 and 3 we're getting this conclusion. Okay. So let's look at line 1. I might break this out into another smaller argument. Line 1, if T, then Q. Line 2, if S, then Y. And then we get this conclusion, 4. So this is 1, 2, 4. If T, then Q, and if S, then Y. Oh boy, that looks messy, but not really if you think about these being units. Let's fill them in. Let's see. First of all, we have some things that are in here as connectors. Let me look at my possible argument forms. I have an and in my conclusion. Where do I have an and in my conclusion? Up there. Conjunction. So here's what's giving me a clue. So here we have, let this be P and let this be Q, because they're in brackets, they're units. So then we have P here and Q here. So P, Q, therefore P and Q, and we get that through conjunction. So I'm going to put that on the line. All right, that was our first argument. There's another one in here too. Excuse me. Okay, let's clean this up so we can see that second argument. I'm going to take this first one out. And the second one says from line 4 and line 3, we get line 5. So 4 tells us if T, then Q, and that's a unit, and if S, then Y, that's a unit, and then 3 says Q or Y, and then 5, I'm sorry, that was not right. 4 and 3, I need 3 here, not the conclusion. Line 3, T or S, and now we get line 5, Q or Y. Now see that what I just did was I made a little error because I wasn't paying attention to details. So that's going to be an important part of logic too, is paying attention to details. We learn through our mistakes, right? So it's okay to make mistakes now. Now, let's look at this. Let's replace it with P and Q. I actually don't think we have to. Let's look at our list of argument forms. And this is very clearly a constructive dilemma, CD. How do I know that? If P, then Q, and if R, then S. P or R, therefore Q or S. Okay, so that's constructive dilemma. Okay, I'm going to pause here and encourage you to do these problems. Let's go back to the original. Start with the small ones. Do the replacement method where you replace P and Q, and where you're putting in the P and Q from the original argument forms, and you're paying attention to the connectors and where they are. Learn these. I would recommend putting these argument forms on a note card and memorizing them. Just start with that, because when you're out there on a train and someone asks you to give them an argument, you can't go, I took a logic class and I learned modus tollens, but I can't remember it now and I can't construct an argument now. You need to put this into your long-term memory and learn the arguments. Now, at this point in the study, we've reached the end of the formal logic, and one thing remains, and that is I gave a little promise, let's say, for a unit on reason and ethics, or reason and the good. So that'll be a bonus unit that I'm going to do just for completeness, and it will correspond to that section on the conceptual map where we went over ethics and the logical options in ethics. So can reason get us to the good? Ooh, that's exciting, isn't it? What is the good? Do you know what the good is? We'll use Aristotle and his view of human nature to talk about what is good and what is evil for humans. So that'll be the bonus unit that comes next.